All right, so here we go. The new stuff, macroeconomy. Now, before we jump right into chapter 11, we need to do a little bit of prep work first. This is stuff that's actually not in the book, or it's spread out throughout the first 3 chapters of the text, and I would rather give it to you straight up front before we get to it, all right? So what we really want to do is talk about the goals of the macroeconomy. In other words, what's trying to happen in the macroeconomy? In the micro world, what were we trying to do? We're trying to make money and make money and make money, right? And if we had to step on people, as long as you made money, it was perfectly fine, okay? Right? Again, it's one of those where if you could walk into your neighbor's house, take everything that they had, walk out, and get away with it, you would do it every day, right? Because that's what capitalism is all about. You do whatever is most important for you as an individual at all times. It's good, right? Ayn Rand, that's what she believes in. All the libertarians out there, that's their goal too. We should have capitalism ruling the world. Of course, again, remember that there would be a lot more death if that would happen. Maybe that would be a good thing, right? Maybe if Darwin stepped in a little bit more, everything would be better. I don't know. Again, the nice part about it is that we can just talk about it. We don't have to actually say whether it is or isn't, right? All right, so first off, who are the people who are taking care of the macroeconomy? Who takes care of the United States economy? Government does one thing, right? Generally they're the biggest, caretaker. Who else takes care of it? You can think big corporations, but multinational corporations are more along the lines looking for those sorts of things. But really, it's governments and really there are some NGOs that are in there that do it. Business, you'd like to think that corporations really want the macroeconomy to survive, but honestly they don't. All right? Any corporation is a part of the microeconomic world. It's part of the business world, and therefore their job is to make as much freaking money as they can, okay? Sometimes, you actually have to prop up an economy so that you can keep making money from that economy, right? So that's why sometimes it looks like big corporations are actually trying to help the economy, is so that they can keep, screwing it as much as they can. Sort of, don't think about it too much. It's grisly, all right? So, governments. What are governments trying to do, right? Well, there's 3 goals that these governments are trying to achieve, right? And these will be the 3 things that you probably have heard the most screamed about over the last, well, not the last 5 years, but maybe 10 or 15 years, all right? So the number one thing that governments are trying to do to try and make sure that the economy is growing is basically this. They want to grow the economy in general. Now, the question, though, is how do we measure the economy? What tells us that the economy is growing? Yeah. Grow GDP. What does GDP stand for? Gross domestic products. I can't spell it. I wanted to put a G in there. Gross domestic product. GDP. Please note that it is different than gross national product. Okay? It is not GNP, it is GDP. GNP used to be what the government used to measure how well our economy was doing, but then our economy was based off of nationality, not where you live. Gross domestic product just basically says that if you are inside the United States of America and you do something, whatever it is that you're doing adds to our gross domestic product. Doesn't matter whether you're French, Canadian, Mexican, American, you could be an alien, right? You could be from Mars, like me. Okay? As long as you're working inside the United States, you are helping the United States gross domestic product. If you are an American and you're living in Germany and working there, you are helping Germany's gross domestic product. Okay? It's domestic, not gross national. Right? So back in the 1980s, which is when we used gross national product, we tried to measure exactly how much Americans produced as opposed to foreigners. Right? And we tried to say that, well, there's 200,000 foreigners working in the United States, and all the things that they produce we're going to take out of GNP because it doesn't count. And the 300,000 or 400,000 Americans that are working out in foreign countries, we're going to take their production and add it to ours because national, right? We wanted this patriotism, American, American, American. And why do you think they stopped doing that? Yeah, because it's really hard to compute how much people are producing in all of those foreign countries, and it's also really hard to compute how much all the people in this country are producing that aren't Americans anymore, because there's millions of people in this country who are not Americans now, and a lot of them are working. Okay? In fact, most of them are. And so instead of trying to keep doing this, every country trying to do it slightly differently, they just said, screw it. We're going to define our net production as a country now as all the work done in our country, period. Who cares who does it, okay? So one of the things that you will be hearing about on a regular basis, if you listen to NPR early in the morning, is what happened to GDP, right? Every month you'll get a report. Well, GDP was, up, and the revised GDP was down, and the blah, 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 blah. The reason we care so much about it is that this determines whether or not we are in a recession or not. If this number goes up, we're not in a recession. If this number goes down, we are in a recession. And what happens when we are in a recession? The entire world goes apeshit bananas, right? Because of the word recession. Of course, all it means is that, 10 of you didn't work as much this quarter as you did last quarter. Damn it, quit it, right? All of you should go out and get a part-time job and work an extra 5 hours per week so that this number can go up. As long as this number goes up, America is strong. And that's what we base it on, folks. Sad but true. All right, now, what's the other thing that we have been screaming about over the last 5 years, constantly, over and over and over again? Right, one of them is GDP. What's the other thing? Jobs. Yeah. Uh-huh. So the other goal of the macroeconomy is to get all of our resources being used. And one of the most major resources that we care about is labor, right? So technically, one of the things that the government or any of these other organizations that take care of our economy should be doing is trying to get everybody working. Right? Now, these two things, they go together, right? So if the government is trying to do something to grow GDP, generally speaking, it will also be heading us towards full employment, right? If GDP is growing, that means that more of our factories are producing stuff. In order to have our factories produce more, what do we need more of? Workers, right? Working in the factories. So in general, these things tend to go together, right? So if someone tells you that GDP is on the rise, they will probably say that employment is on the rise or that unemployment's falling, right? Now, the third piece, which is probably the only piece that you haven't heard anything about in the last 5 years, although you may have heard snippets of it back in 2008, 2009. The other goal of a macroeconomy is to guarantee that prices stay relatively stable. Have you heard anyone crying about prices in the last 5 years? Maybe gas prices specifically, but overall prices? Yeah, there's been a little bit of a talk about grocery prices, but is anybody really worried about it? Have you heard the big major networks screaming about it? Is Fox News chanting about it? Is MSNBC screaming about it? No more than normal, which is, in fact, in this case, like I said, over the last 5 years, it's almost been nil, right? Why is that? Well, true, but the MSNBC people should be looking out there going, look at all those poor people. If the prices are going up, they should be, they should be screaming and crying, right? I mean, that's the liberal standpoint, right? So why aren't they screaming and crying about prices going up? Because prices haven't been going up. I mean, they've gone up a little bit, sure, but they haven't gone up 10% over the last 5 years. Inflation over the last 5 years has been somewhere between 0 and 2%. Actually, somewhere between -% and 2%. Right? Inflation has been low. Why? Why haven't we had inflation over the last 5 years? Why not? What do you have to have in order to have inflation? What drives up prices, guys? There's two things that drive up prices in the micro world. What are they? Demand could be on the rise, and lack of supply. Those are the two things that are going on. Well, given that we're in a, non-recession recovery or whatever that is our demand for goods up? I mean, maybe over the last year it is, but over the last 5 years, what's happened to the American demand for goods and services? It's gone down, folks. I mean, even gas, technically, as a country, we actually purchase less gas as a country over the last 5 years than we did 5 years ago. I mean, we're buying less. If you buy less, what happens to prices? Technically, when demand is down, prices stay stable. This is why prices haven't been an issue over the last 5 years, because our demand is not there. Because in order for us to demand stuff, we have to be making more money. And unfortunately, are we making more money? Not really. We're getting there, right? I mean, we've seen growth in GDP, but we haven't necessarily seen it grow a lot. All right? So this is what makes the macroeconomy such a pain in the ass, is that stable prices are the opposite of growth in employment and growth in GDP. When GDP and full employment are happening, when everybody's working and demand is on the rise, we're buying stuff left and right? So think 2002 through 2007. Right? What was going on in the economy then? We all had a job. We were all getting 10% pay raises every year. What were we doing? We were buying stuff left and right. What was happening? Prices were skyrocketing, right? That's what we cried about in 2002 through 2007. We weren't crying about GDP or full employment. Unemployment was at 2.2%. Everybody who wanted a job had a job. Put that, whatever that means. But prices were the big issue. Then we had the crash. All of a sudden, these became the only thing we could talk about. And because these were the only things we're talking about, prices basically stood still. And in fact, what most economists talked about when they talked about prices, they were nervous about the fact that prices were falling. They were sad. Why would economists be nervous about falling prices? What do businesses do when their prices fall? They cut the workforce even more, right? Because they're not making as much money selling their product. So lowering prices actually makes this stuff worse. Right? It's a little scary, but it is basically what we're looking at. Okay, so the key here is realizing that these are the three things that the macroeconomy is always trying to work with. We're always trying to either make the economy grow, make employment grow, or stabilize prices. And note that these two and this one, they're always fighting against each other. Because if you pump the economy full of money and everybody's got lots and lots of money, what are they going to do? They're going to spend. And when we spend, prices take off. If we don't pump the economy and nobody has any money, people don't spend, prices will stay nice and stable. Great, stable prices. But unfortunately, what's happening to the economy? Stagnant. It's sitting there. It's not growing. We're all whining and crying about it, right? So this is the give and the take, right? And if you listen to the news back in 2008 when the crash happened and Obama said, I want to pump the economy with $2 trillion, the reason why we didn't and we only pumped $1 trillion into the economy was that. All of the people who said $2 trillion is too much instead of just the $1 trillion he spent was because they said if Obama pumps $2 trillion out there, people will have so much money, they will start spending and prices will skyrocket, we'll have hyperinflation, and we'll turn into Argentina. You can go back to the news reports. That's actually a quote from Paul Ryan. That was what he stated. We can't have a stimulus package of $2 trillion. We have to cut it down, make sure that we don't go into as much debt, because otherwise prices will skyrocket. We'll have terrible inflation in this economy. So we only had a stimulus package back in 2008, 2009 of $1 trillion, and unfortunately, that wasn't enough to necessarily cure the economy. And we've been suffering from it for 4 years. The joy of the economy, right, is that it's easy to have 20/20 vision when you look back. It's really hard to have 20/20 vision looking forward. So the question, was, well, how much should have Obama said? Should he have said 1.5 trillion? Should he have said 1.75 trillion? I don't know. Thank God I don't have to know. All I do know is that I get to look back at it and say, $1 trillion, that wasn't enough, asshole. And we can all bitch and scream and say, it was his fault! Or whoever else you want to scream at, depending on which party you believe in more, right? That's the joy of it, right? If you're a Republican, you scream at Obama. If you're a Democrat, you scream at Congress for limiting him, right? Whichever way you want to look at it. But this is what I will try and start class with for the next 3 weeks. These 3 things, so that you don't forget them. The idea is that whenever you hear any of our government officials talking about what they think the government should do, one of their goals has to be one of these 3 things. So, right now, our Congress has shut the government. What's their goal? Are they trying to grow the economy by shutting down the government? I hope that's not what they're saying. Are they trying to get full employment by laying off 500 or 800,000, or furloughing 800,000 people? Probably not. So what must they be doing? That had better be their damn goal, stabilizing prices. And that's what they had better be screaming about, is stabilize prices. How many of the people who have shut down the government are screaming about stable prices and how that's what we need right now? Hello? This is why this entire process right now is making me insane. Because there isn't any caretaking of the macroeconomy being done whatsoever, right? What are they doing? They're playing politics. And unfortunately, in the process of playing politics, they are not helping any of those 3 things. Now, in theory, you can argue, and this is what I was sort of expecting to hear from the people who have said that the Affordable Care Act is a bad idea, is that this will drive prices way up, right? So if they were screaming about the fact that healthcare prices are so high now that it's going to stagnate the economy forever, okay. That argument would be at least a valid argument, although whether they can back it up with actual numbers and figures, you would think that they would if they could, and since they haven't, I assume that they can't. But of course, and since you can't have accurate numbers until it's happened, and then you have to let it happen, right? So the whole chicken circling the egg, right? Well, whatever. So, sigh. Okay. Regardless, though, what I want you to be able to do from now on, when you hear or stuck listening to, or for some reason wind up with a politician anywhere near you, and you can't run screaming, which is, of course, what you probably should do, you should be trying to figure out what they're trying to do, right? And if they are not trying to do one of these 3 things, if they are not talking about one of these 3 things because of what they're doing, they are not doing their job, period, okay? Because this is what they should be doing. It's the only damn thing they have to do, all right? In theory, they can talk about, well, making the people safe and blah, 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 blah. Right? This is their job, all right? The cool thing about it is that if you look at the Federal Reserve Board's, dictates, its structure, which is we will talk about the Fed at some point in time, written into its charter are these three things. That's its goal. The Federal Reserve Board, basically the United States Federal Bank, our banking system, has in its charter that its job is to grow the economy, get us as close to full employment as possible, and keep prices stable. That's actually in its freaking charter, which is cool as all hell, because this is the basics, the first day of every macroeconomic class you ever take. So at least when I look at the Fed, I say, okay, at least the Fed should be doing one of these three things at all times. Right? One of the things the Fed has been doing over the past 5 years has been pumping money into this economy left and right, right? The whole quantitative easing, if you guys have heard that phrase. It's hard to avoid it. Basically, it's the Fed's job of trying to pump these two things. And again, the Fed is looking at prices saying they're pretty damn stable. I'm not worried about them. Prices start to go up. I will keep trying to push these things. In theory, that's what the U.S. government should be doing too, right? It should be saying, oh, prices are pretty stable. Let's do something to grow the economy, right? And let's leave it at that. All right, so that is our goal. Now, let's start with number one. GDP. Gross domestic product. Let me give you the book definition for it first. The market value of all final goods and services. Please realize that services are included. Produced in a nation per time period. Usually it's defined per year, but GDP gets calculated so frequently now that you can actually see whether or not it's grown from week to week, which is insane, but they actually try and do it. Usually, GDP numbers are relatively accurate on a per quarter system, but you will hear them literally weekly and certainly at least monthly if you listen to the wrong radio stations at the right time. So, again, first of all it has to be to do is produced in the nation, in. Not by the nation, but in it, right? So again, all the people who are not Americans producing in America are helping GDP. So the question then is, what is GDP? And what is not GDP? That's one of the questions to try and figure out, right? So, market value. What does market value mean to you guys? What's market value? What you sell it for, yeah, or how much you get paid, all right? So the first thing that has to happen, right, is one, these things have to be sold. Do you buy everything that you own? Were you ever young once? You happened to walk into a store, and maybe you walked out, past the register, but your pockets weren't empty? You don't have to admit it because, yeah, I know I'm taping it, and this might be used against you in a court of law, so don't say anything. But if that might have happened to you, that item that was potentially in your pocket that was not paid for, guess what? stolen goods do not affect GDP. Although, over the last 5 years or so, 5 or 10 years, the government has actually been trying to add a correction factor to GDP to represent lost GDP from theft. Yeah, it's the same sort of thing. I mean, in a business, you have to do the same sort of thing where the books don't quite balance. You say, okay, there's a kitty or a slush fund that you either add or subtract from. Right, that represents stuff that disappeared. Whatever. The fact remains, though, stolen goods, nope, don't count. Now, in addition, right, think about market value. Somebody remind me. Chelsea, Grant. Somebody left these glasses in class last week. Remind me. Sorry. Thanks. So imagine, if you will, that Chelsea and Grant in the back there tell you guys that they would be willing to tutor you guys in math if you would tutor them in econ. Bartering system, right? Now, are you producing something by helping each other out? Certainly you are, right? You're both being more productive, being more educational. Are you spending any money doing it, though? So is there any market value in what you're doing then? Nope. Anytime you trade things, folks, you are hurting the economy. All of that, Craigslist crap, no. That is hurting your country. Now, imagine, if you will, that I went to Goodwill and I bought this shirt. Can't remember if I did or not. But now, when was this shirt made? Probably made, 4 or 5 years ago. When it was made, when it was produced, it hit GDP. It counted towards GDP. When I buy it a second time, should it be counted as GDP again? Nope. It's all final goods and services produced. Not all final goods and services bought, but produced. So if you buy and sell something a bazillion times, it only counts once, right? If you count it a second time, then you're double counting it like it's worth twice the first time you made it, right? Which, that's obviously wrong. So in this knot, all used goods do not help GDP, which means that every time you guys buy anything used, you're hurting, you're being unpatriotic. Shame on all of you. From now on, you now know, to be a true patriotic American, you must buy new every time. Because otherwise, you're hurting GDP. And if you're hurting GDP, then you are clearly hurting the country, right? Because in order for our country to be good or great or whatever, GDP must be growing. So all of you people out there thinking you're saving money by buying used goods, nope, all you're doing is shooting yourself in the foot. Saving yourself a little bit of money so that you can screw the rest of the country. How dare you? I will only buy used, new goods ever because I'm a true American. I swear. All right. So, in addition to used goods, right? So, when you are working, the people who make it's done by the government. So, how does the government know that you've worked? W-2s, tax forms, all that other kind of stuff, right? So imagine, if you will, you go somewhere and you tell somebody, oh, I'll help you with this project you're working on, but just pay me $100 under the table. Cash labor, not measured by a W-2 form, not proper taxing, not part of GDP. Not a part of GDP. Now, if she reported it on her W-2s, yes, and paid taxes on all the money that she was making, come on, she's got to step up and help her country. Right? I mean, come on. I paid taxes when I was 9. I had to paper out I made enough money that since I was a dependent, anything you make over $1,500, you had to pay taxes on. I made more than $1,500 delivering newspapers every year of my life from 8 to 16, folks. I had to pay taxes every year. I'm a patriotic American. Don't want to hear no lip from any of you. So non-tracked by government transactions. So even if you do that, so imagine, if you will, you're like, okay, we won't do this bartering system anymore, but we'll say, I'll pay you $30 to tutor me in econ, and you pay me $30 to tutor you in math, and you trade the money back and forth. Well, if you don't report it to the government, pay sales tax on it, or pay income tax on it, you still are screwing all the rest of the Americans. Quit it! I love this section. But, I mean, you see where I'm getting at, right? I mean, but this is the way GDP is measured. This is the only way it's done. This is the only way we know how to do it at this point in time. So if you are not making sure what you do affects GDP, you're hurting it, and that's hurting the country. All right? So final goods are over here. What's not a final good? Well, think about a car. What makes up a car? What do you have to put into a car? Parts. You have to put in an engine. You have to put in doors. You have to put in tires. Right? I mean, so if you're a company that's making car doors, right? So you're cranking out car doors for Ford, right? So, or, well, I guess not here, but somewhere else. You're cranking out car doors for Ford or GM or Chrysler or whoever, right? When you make that car door, you would think you're producing GDP, right? Right? I mean, you're producing something new and final. It's a door. But you're going to sell that car door to GM, and GM's going to take that car door and shove it onto its, it's a car, whatever, a truck, whatever. Does the GDP count again in the car? It's going to, because a car's worth is just worth all the sum of its parts, right? So that car door, if you were a company building car doors and that car door is used to put onto a new car, it's not GDP. Right? That's what's known as an intermediate good. And again, the reason why you can't add the car door onto the car and into its production as a door to begin with is because that car door could go out to a retail shop that sells car doors to people who need them, right? I mean, so when you, God forbid, have an accident and you smush the front quarter panel of your car, what do? Well, first you go to the junkyard, you see if you can buy one used, and then you stop and you say, wait a second, I'm a patriotic American. I'm not going to do that. Or you're driving a 1968 Volvo, and there's no way there's another one in the junkyard, so you don't even bother looking. So you go look for a new one that will fit on your car, and you buy a new car door from a retail shop. That car door that you bought from a retail shop, that is GDP, because you bought it and put it on the car door yourself. It's now new. It's a final product. But if that car door salesman sells to GM, it doesn't, because then it's intermediate, right? Because it's not being used as a final purchase or sale. It's sale to GM, who's going to take it and put it on a car, and that's going to add value to the actual car instead of being an additional, a final product to begin with. Otherwise, all of the car shops would have to figure out, well, how much of my car comes from the door, how much of it comes from the engine, how much of it comes from the headlights, how much of it comes from the tires, and that's too much of a pain in the butt. So they push it back and say, the people who produce tires, the people who produce car doors. They have to decide when they go to sell them, who did they sell them to? If they sold them to a final goods shop like GM or Ford or whoever, then it's not part of GDP. And guess what, folks? When they do that, they pay less tax, right? It's the same thing that carpenters do when they go to like Home Depot or Menards, right? They go in there and they say, look, I'm going to go in here and buy, 20 lengths of wood. If they're going to use that wood to finish building a deck, that's a new finished product, that's an intermediate good that Home Depot is selling, they will actually charge less tax on that carpenter when he buys the goods. So they track the numbers correctly, and they try to incentivize people to create finished goods, right? I mean, this is part of the process, right? But that happens every day all around this country, and it's all so that we can properly measure GDP. Okay, so we've kind of gotten a handle on the goods side of it. What about the services side of it, right? So we know that bartering doesn't work. So if we barter services, it doesn't work, right? But let's think about realtors. Realtors, what do they generally sell? Do they sell new houses? No, almost never, right? Generally, that's done by the contracting firm that's building all the homes to begin with, right? So most realtors, what do they sell? They sell used goods, right? So everything that a realtor does, how much does a realtor get paid for selling a house? Do you guys know how that works? Commission, yep. They get a 3% commission on every sale that they make, right? So the buyer's agent gets 3% and the seller's agent gets 3%. So when you sell a house for $100,000, they both get $3,000, right? And you only get $94,000 if you sell it, right? That commission on a used sale, on a used house sale, think that's a part of GDP? Turns out it is. Commissions on any sale in a year are a part of GDP. So the sale itself may not count, right? So when you sell a $100,000 house, that won't add $100,000 to GDP. But the $3,000 of that $100,000 that went to the realtor as a commission, that is GDP. Any service that you provide and get paid for and then pay income tax on or sales tax on, automatically GDP. And I guarantee, well, I can't guarantee you, but most realtors, when they get a commission check, will appropriately file it as income and pay the appropriate taxes on it. So at least there's one that counts, right? Yay! Okay, you see, though, how good are we at measuring this kind of crap? I mean, this is a real pain in the patootie, right? How are you going to measure? How are you going to determine? Imagine, if you will, you have a factory that produces nails. There's a bunch of them in this country. When is a nail a finished good versus an intermediate good? I mean, if you sell it to a carpenter, it has to be intermediate, right? Because they're going to go and use it to build a deck or a house or whatever, and they're going to use it to bang a house, keep the boards of a house together. That's an intermediate good. It shouldn't be final. But if you just sell that nail to True Value Hardware, and True Value Hardware sells it to me so that I can, put a nail into my wall and hang a picture on it, that nail then technically is a final good, and it should count towards GDP. I mean, how many nails do you think a company would produce in a year? I think millions or billions, right? I mean, how many of them were? I mean, they try and track it with sales taxes, and the carpenters come in and say, I'm going to buy, 200,000 nails because I need them, and they're going to use most of them for building a final good, but, what are they going to do with some of the others of them? You can take them home and use them to put in, and that's when those carpenters are being unpatriotic, right? Because it was an intermediate good, but they used it as a final one. Damn it. They're screwing all of us by hanging that picture up. Okay, yeah, you can get carried away with this. So, in general, though, another way to look at it is that most services that you get paid for, as long as you're getting paid for them and having to pay income tax on them, generally is GDP, right? So, any income payment that hits taxes. Pretty much. So every time I show up here today and teach to you guys, I am generating income because I'm working, and I'm paying income tax on it. Technically, I'm generating GDP, right? You guys, you all paid for this particular finished product. Everything that you paid into the system to get my teaching, you guys are helping GDP. Good job. See, you're not as bad as you thought you were. Now, can you think of any income where you're getting paid and you have to pay income tax on it, but you didn't actually do anything to get that money? Well, in theory, bonuses are for extra work above and beyond, right? So, you know, I mean, bonuses are, you might think that that's true, but those count. Bonuses count. Lottery, yeah, that's pretty close. That's over here with gambling winnings. Again, unless you report them as taxed, as an income tax, right? I mean, if you're a professional gambler, right, so you know the guys that do the whole World Poker Tour? I mean, those people that earn enough money playing poker to actually, you know, make a living, they actually will file their gambling winnings as taxes. That's actually part of GDP. But if you just go to Vegas and you happen to win $1,000, or you hit the jackpot at a little ho-chunk, you know, slot machine, and as long as it's not more than $1,000, you just take that money home, and it's all, you know, you don't. I mean, you should put it on your income taxes, but are you guys going to do it? Neither would I. I mean, I'm not that patriotic. But so, what other types of things do you get paid for doing nothing? I mean, what? When you get laid off, what do? File for unemployment. Do you have to pay tax on your unemployment check? Yes, you do. Are you doing anything, though, for that unemployment check? Are you? I mean, you're supposed to be applying for 2 jobs a week, but are you producing anything by applying for those 2 jobs? So technically, there's a transfer payment side that is also not part of GDP. A transfer payment is any payment you receive where you didn't do any work to receive it. So the classic one of those is unemployment. What else? I mean, what happens when you turn 65? What do? You retire. What do you do after you retire? You sit around and collect Social Security. Guess what? Are you working? Nope. Again, though, you have to pay tax on the Social Security payments that you get because it's income. But technically, you're not working for it. That's over here, too. It's all over the place, folks, right? So it looks like, I mean, you're getting paid, right? So people think you're being productive in GDP. No. Nope. Now, why is it then that we do these things, right? Why does government pay welfare checks and unemployment checks and Social Security? Is it if it's not helping the actual GDP? Exactly, right? And when you do collect an unemployment payment, normally what are you going to do with that unemployment check? I mean, what are you going to buy with it? You're going to pay bills, right? You're going to buy food, you're going to pay rent, you're going to buy gas, all of those new products. Those will all be things that hit GDP almost instantly, right? Who you don't want to give an unemployment check to is the rich, wealthy guy out there who gets it, and instead of spending it, what does he do? He just throws it in the bank with all of his other stuff. That's not generating any additional GDP. These people, when they get these checks, those checks almost instantly go into spending on new GDP. That's why the governments like these things when they try to help people out. Because in theory, the first payment doesn't help, but as soon as those payments are spent, yes, it does, right? So those people who are getting unemployment checks are paying for their rent, they're paying for their mortgage, and therefore they're not having, the value of houses drop even further, right? Or they're making sure that they eat and buying food. Food is one of the hugest things on our GDP list, folks. And a lot of it comes from these payments, right? So, now, there are some things that are GDP that may not look like their GDP, though. Earnings from investments in private industry. So in other words, if you loan, or suppose you invest $1,000 into your bank and you earn interest on that money, all of the interest that you earn, part of GDP. Right? If you invest in a bond for IBM, right? So IBM puts out some bond order to purchase new buildings or new office buildings. You give them $1,000 and they're going to pay you back $1,500 in 2 or 3 years. That interest that you generate, all GDP. Now, suppose you buy stock in Apple. Suppose you bought stock in Apple 5 years ago when the price of stock was, $400 or $500 a share. I have one share because that's about all I could afford. I want to get the quarterly report. So to get the quarterly report from a company, you have to own one share of it. So I bought a share of Apple, $450. It is now worth $840. Have I added to GDP because I invested $400 in them and it's now worth $800? Have I produced anything? No. Have I paid tax on it yet? No. Technically, when I sell it, do I have to pay tax? I have to pay capital gains tax. Please note that it's only from income taxes, right? It's really only income taxes that you're paying things on. So purchasing and selling of stocks and bonds, not a part of GDP. Because think about what you're doing, right? When you buy a share of Apple, what you're really doing is buying a piece of the company, right? Am I producing anything with that piece of the company? No. When I sell it to someone else, have I produced anything by selling it to them? No. I may have made some money in the deal, but my production, zippo. Buying and selling stock does not help this country at all. All stockbrokers should be shot on sight. Just kidding, of course. But do realize that that's another one up here, sale of stocks and bonds. You can make money off of the deal, but it's not helping the economy at all because all you're doing is basically saying that the value of this company went up and therefore my percent of it went up too, and I gave it to someone else, right? So it's something that was already created. I was selling it to someone else. It's like I have a used good and I sold it to someone else. It just happened to be worth more when I sold it, right? That's what stock is. It's just a used good. Utterly worthless. All those stockbrokers get paid millions and billions of dollars to do their job. Worthless. Now, again, be a little bit cautious here. So earning private industry. Underline the private. If you invest in the U.S. as a country, in other words, if you go to the Fed and buy a U.S. savings bond, right? So your niece or your nephew or your cousin has a kid, and what do? When your relatives have kids, if you have no clue what to buy them, you go down to the bank and you say, give me a $50 U.S. savings bond so that their kid can get $50 when they turn 21 or 18 or whatever it is that you guys do nowadays. I mean, that's what my grandparents did, right? On my 5th birthday, I got a U.S. savings bond that was $50 when I turned 20. Woohoo! I earned interest, right? It's interest income, but unfortunately that interest income, since it came from the government, is actually not part of GDP. It's actually considered a transfer payment. It's one of the nitpickiest points about GDP is that if you invest in a U.S. company or a bank, the interest counts. But if you invest in the government itself, it actually doesn't. Because, of course, industry produces lots of stuff, right? That's its job. The government, does it produce it? At least not according to GDP. Again, which is just, for me, it's an absolutely awesome inside joke. Sort of like the government agreeing that it basically does nothing. It's like, hey, we agree. Oh, all right. Anyways, that gets us started in on Chapter 11. That's nowhere near all of it. I just love this part of it because I get to tell funny stories and complain about you being non-patriotic Americans because you buy used goods and you save money. Quit it! Every time you get paid, you should instantly go out and spend every penny you just made on something new, period. And if you have to justify it to someone else in your household, you now have reason to. My teacher told me to do it. You can blame it on me, that's fine. All right, Joe, turn me off, would you? So no homework for Wednesday, just take a chill. I will assign some